Trevor, thanks so much. That was a terrific overview and precursor to this panel discussion. I'd like to introduce the panel members. You just heard from Trevor Mundell, who's president of Gates Global Health. We also have Frida Lewis Hall on as part of the panel. Frida's had a 35-year career in research, medicine, and education. She was the CMO and executive vice president of Pfizer, overseeing all of Pfizer's therapeutic efforts, and now serves on various advisory boards, both from the government and educational and biotech. And it's also a pleasure to introduce John Martin. John recently stepped down as executive chairman and was the CEO of Gilead for 20 years. John's probably done more than any single person in the development of antivirals for the global community. So thanks all of you for participating in this panel. And why don't I start out? Trevor gave a really nice overview of the challenges of COVID and some of the positives that have come out. Clearly vaccines have played a major role, and now diagnostics are finally catching up to the level we need for monitoring virus. I thought I'd start out with John. John, clearly your company Gilead it was produced the only antiviral that's been used against COVID-19. What do you think is the role for antivirals in the future? And how do we think about accelerating the development of antivirals so they catch up with the vaccines or complement the vaccines in the antibody therapeutics? Oops. I can't hear John.
Yeah, sorry. There's clearly a strong need, and vaccines not everyone will get them, and it looks like we're going to have variants come up more and more over time. Vaccines can actually select. Trevor's talk, if you didn't think we'd need oral drugs, you'd be disabused of that now. We clearly need oral drugs for treatment, prevention, and presumably even post-exposure prophylaxis. I've had in my career at least 3 cases of where we stockpiled products for emerging viruses or concerns. The first was Vistide, which was for smallpox. It's a CMV drug. And then Tamiflu, as you know, governments around the world stockpiled that, and that was invented at Gilead. And then finally, Remdesivir. We took the risk of stockpiling 150 kilos many years ago. Likelihood it'd never be used, but if it needed to be used, it would be there. We knew it was active against coronaviruses, all of them, and so it was very prudent to do that, and that's why Gilead was able to actually get the emergency use approval for it, because there's plenty of drug on stockpile that could be made available. Maybe that's enough for now in terms, we'll talk more about how to accelerate it, I think, as we go along, but we have a lot to pack in for this 30 minutes.
Okay, thanks, John. Frida, clearly we've faced a lot of challenges, but I think there are some silver linings with COVID too, with respect to drug development. How do you see COVID positively impacting drug development and regulatory approval now and in the future?
Yeah, so I think that it's been a very interesting experience to have clinical trials, our clinical trial ecosystem interrupted in the way that it has, or disrupted in the way that it has, because it's led to some very interesting transformational work. Let me start with the downside first, if I can, because it poses the shape for the upsides. So 2 major opportunities or focuses of the disruption. One is reprioritization, and I think that our clinical trial ecosystem did an exceptional job of repurposing, partnering and collaborating, and reprioritizing company and university portfolios in order to get the work done around antivirals, vaccines, and therapeutics in general. Where we really had some challenges was in logistics disruption, and we were disrupted in a host of ways: safety of patients and researchers, monitoring, visits in the clinics that led to protocol challenges. And so a lot of studies were delayed, modified, suspended, or in some cases halted. And all of that has led to a resurgence of using novel technologies such as virtual trials or decentralized trials, as well as master protocols and platform trials in order to get the work done. And so I think that there's been an exciting opportunity. If you think of the active 5 process, to look at therapeutics for hospitalized patients on this platform trial, thinking about how quickly that was set up, how well interwoven it is in work amongst us as companies, public and private partners. I think that's been a silver lining for sure, if not gold.
Great, thanks. Trevor, in your talk, you pointed out that there's been huge progress made in vaccine development, diagnostics, and we're thinking about antivirals. It seems that the scientific community responded very, very quickly to COVID, but public policymakers actually we're a little bit behind. And how does one think about, even with the distribution of vaccines, how does one really think about getting a large coordinated effort as coronavirus variants come out and one worries about the next pandemic? How do we begin to link up the scientific medical sector with public policy sector?
Yeah, Pete, that has been a principal sort of focus of ours as this has broken out. And it's led to some of the global architecture that's been set up, this Act A, which is the global accelerator for vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics. I would say the vaccines is probably the most articulated part of that. On the therapeutic side, it really has been around so far provision of oxygen and dexamethasone. So we were waiting for an additional set of therapeutics that'll be easy to distribute. But that Act A architecture was really a sort of a transient structure put in place in response to COVID. And now the question is, what is the global governance going to be that's going to replace that? Is it going to be the same thing? Is it going to work in a different way? COVAX was the vaccine part of things, which expanded upon what Gavi was already doing for the Gavi countries to a broader set of countries in terms of getting access to vaccines. So we have seen people jumping in with these new set of policy ideas of how to do this. Of course, they've been a patchwork. So we can't have the patchwork going forward. And I think now there's a huge effort at the G7, G20 level where governments are going to have to come in a major way to pull together. Will there be a treaty around pandemics that people have to sign up for in terms of data exchange, in terms of regulatory compliance? And will the companies, most importantly, sign up to the same treaty? So we have certainty around supply and we have certainty around provision for lower middle income countries at an affordable price.
Thanks. John, in thinking about antivirals, they clearly take longer to develop than vaccines and biologics, where you can go from sequence to expression. With the history of antivirals and HIV and HCV and other areas, how do you think we should be thinking about, accelerating the development of antivirals for future pandemics?
Yeah, so just to tie back to what Trevor and Fred has said, The COVID has really accelerated everything. And if you think of it, remdesivir went from some sort of idea maybe in January, it should be developed to be approved in less than 4 months by the beginning of May. That was an emergency use, full approval later in the year. It really demonstrates these things can be done when there's a big sense of urgency. As fields mature, there will be more concern about safety. The trade-off, sometimes that takes longer to get approved to really fully understand the risk benefit. But the urgency now really points to that. There are a lot of groups working together to bring new molecules forward. As we heard earlier this morning, your excellent program, that has gone slower. The discovery and identification of compounds takes quite a bit of time. Remdesivir is already in a bottle and had been in patients for Ebola. So that it's important, I think, at this point in time that we continue to work in the field to be able to respond to pandemics and make sure we have some potential drugs stockpiled. And I think it, Pete, as you said, the fact that it's going to be with us for a while, I believe this urgency will continue and there will be the will to better prepare for future pandemics than there is today, or there was last year.
Thanks, John. And Frida and John, you come from the commercial sector, and Trevor, the foundation has partnerships with both, commercial and nonprofit institutions. Frida, how do you think the commercial and academic sectors can work together going forward? Clearly, there's a huge amount of enthusiasm from scientists from every sector to deal with COVID. How do you think they can work together, and how do you think all of those efforts should be coordinated, and by whom?
Well, first of all, I think that there is some wonderful models now. I am a fan of public-private plus partnerships, so all the P's, right, coming together. So government, private institutions, academic included, as well as geographically integrated organizations. One of my favorite examples is the foundation of the NIH work now with NIH. I mentioned earlier, ACTIVE, which is accelerating COVID therapeutic interventions and vaccines, which is a fancy acronym, but anyway. It's really a coming together of government agencies, cross-government agencies, intra-NIH and beyond, a number of companies, tens of companies, if you would, who are participating actively, as well as private institutions and organizations that are bringing their expertise and networks to the table as well. And they're doing things that may not be seen as very common between academic institutions, agencies, and companies, which is a lot of sharing. If you look at the work that's being done preclinically in this, it is actually doing work together to reduce redundancy and then sharing the data so that we could move in our different but aligned perspectives. Also, I mentioned earlier platform trials. So, why set up independent when you can work together using a common site and common arms, if you would, as comparators, and you can kind of plug in and plug out. So I think that these meta collaborations is what I call them, are really of the future, and hopefully we'll set them up before we need them and begin to work this way, not under these extreme circumstances, but as everyday circumstances, and then we'll scale ourselves or turn ourselves to the next urgent issue. But I'm hoping that these meta collaborations are here to stay.
John, you've been involved in collaborations around HIV and distributing HIV antivirals. Are there lessons to learn from the past?
Well, it's lost in time, but I was in charge of D4T's development in the 80s at Bristol Myers. And I promised myself that'd be the last HIV drug I'd work on that's not dosed just once a day. And so at Gilead, we had that focus on only once a day drugs. And then beyond that, to put all 3 drugs in a single tablet regimen so that you have great compliance. You don't take a partial regimen and don't get resistance. And that was critical. And it may be critical here too. And the cooperation, as Frida was mentioning, among these various industry groups was very important in that stage. So we can talk about more later, but there were groups dating back into the 80s where NIH brought teams together from industry and academia with very substantial grants to do new drug discovery. And ultimately, a bunch of drugs came out of it. And to have complete single tablet regimens, we collaborated with Bristol Myers, Merck, and J&J to put these programs together. And that worked well. It did have a lot of encouragement from the US government to bring the companies to the table and help expedite the ability to work together. And I believe, as Frida just mentioned, it's happening now, and it's an important aspect of this.
Trevor, we've not only been scientists fighting the virus, okay, we've actually been fighting a lot of misinformation and public perception of the threat of the virus, and various treatments for the virus and so forth and so on. And I know the foundation takes kind of a holistic view in the developing world of educating people, not only providing new medicines, but educating people. As we think about pandemics and dealing with pandemics in the future, how does the foundation think about, the public's role in educating the public and policymakers? I once read a book written by an old colleague of mine at Berkeley, Physics for Modern Presidents, okay, where it was basically a primer on physics and what physics can teach you about dealing with global warming and terrorist threats. How is the foundation thinking about that aspect of the pandemic, which has a huge impact on how we react as a society?
Yeah, Pete, I think that there's one clear opportunity for us to have action over here, which is through the sort of trusted sources of information in any country, and often in the health system. Those are the healthcare professionals or healthcare workers, whether it be a physician or whether it be a malaria healthcare worker in a peripheral village in Africa. Those are the people that the populations will often listen to first in terms of what should they do, how should they respond. And then there would be traditional healers as well that we've worked with in the global health space, who may have their own views, but certainly can be partnered with in a useful way. So how do we not get into the propagation that compound like hydroxychloroquine is highly active and should be used? That didn't come from the general population. That often came from healthcare professionals who advocated the use and used those drugs. And how do we get that information to them? The same thing happened with Ebola. Surprisingly, or maybe unsurprisingly, the same set of repurposed drugs actually came up as active in Ebola as came up now. Hydroxychloroquine was high on the list as it should be used for Ebola. So how do we, in the drug effort, actually get that information out early on? I think the reframe library was the hope that we would, and it was a substantial part of the solution, I think. But then, we got stuck, as we were just chatting earlier, with the assay systems and not having the ways of using the reframe as we'd want to get the information out, which would have said definitively, hydroxychloroquine, you don't have to do studies about this. It doesn't work. It doesn't work as well as remdesivir, for sure. And some of the other drugs that are now being propagated, ivermectin is one of them, and I believe also fluvoxamine. So we have this misinformation, but it's coming from the healthcare professionals in many cases, actually, as much as from the population.
Yeah. So the foundation has also thought, we're focused on coronaviruses and coronavirus variants, but is there the risk of other pandemics, influenza and others that we should be worried about? And how do we begin to develop, a cohesive, well-coordinated effort against future pandemics? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Pete, after Ebola, there was the effort in setting up this coalition for epidemic preparedness innovation, which took on the role of developing platforms and vaccines for the key viral threats. So there was a lot of convenings around with all the virologists of note to come up with a list of potential viral candidates. And so we went through the list of Rift Valley fever and influenza, new influenza strains, and the hantaviruses, and this very nasty Nipah, CNS virus that has been causing outbreaks in Asia, in South Asia. So we had the list of these known viruses. And then, of course, we had to put the rider in the bottom. And SARS and MERS, these coronaviruses, were in there, but they were not particularly transmissible. So they were certainly part of the target list. But then we put in at the bottom of the list pathogen X, which was to cover our bases for the unknown thing. And everybody in their hearts really believed we were probably going to deal with pathogen X. And you can question whether COVID-19 was that pathogen X. It was a little bit unexpected. So I think we also have to prepare for the unexpected. But we have the list of the key candidates now, the influenza viruses, the coronaviruses, the other coronaviruses. And we need to track them to their zoonotic hosts as well. So we can't just wait for them to jump the barrier into humans. We need to be doing investigations. And I think that looking at animal viruses, whether it be in bats or whether it be in livestock, is going to be a big part of the picture as well.
Okay, thanks, Trevor. And Frida, as we think about the impact of COVID-19, what are the take-home lessons there that could apply to, all the other diseases that challenge, the healthcare systems and global health, cancer? Is any of this going to change the way we deal with cancer or metabolic disease or, pulmonary diseases in general? Do you think there'll be a spillover effect?
Well, actually, I think that one of the platinum linings is that we have started to understand the fragility of the systems that we use to diagnose and manage disease, but also to help people stay healthy. So a look at the health equity, health disparities issues have really come to the forefront in the face of COVID as a global issue. And I think that some of our learnings are going to, for sure, get translated into better understanding, better preparedness, everything from ensuring the inclusion of global populations into the clinical work that we're doing, understanding communications, alignment, and policy alignment as an important way of managing not just infectious disease, but other chronic diseases as well. And to understand the underlying chronic disease, I'm doing that with the air quotation marks, disease paradigms as risk factors, if you would, for populations, and negative outcomes for patients who are infected. So matching kind of Trevor with the preparedness on a variety of insights and therapeutics and vaccines for the infectious part, but then doubling down on what we can and should be doing about better understanding and getting out in front of chronic illnesses that are affecting people around the world.
Great, thanks, Frida. John, you led an incredibly successful organization in the development of antivirals over the years. If somebody said, how how much money would you need, and how would you organize an effort to generate antivirals proactively against coronavirus variants and other potential pandemics? Given what you accomplished at Gilead, how would you think about organizing such an effort?
Yeah, hey, Pete, your talk this morning actually gives a good key to it. And that is that Scripps has built up this translational capability with Caliber and knows how to develop drugs, and that most academic institutions do not. And you pointed out how the motivations are so different between academia and industry as to what you want to accomplish and what you get rewarded for. So it's to that end, in the 80s, I mentioned already that NIH set up national cooperative drug discovery groups, where at the stage of discovery research, they would fund it at an academic institution, but you had to have an industrial partner who was working with you from the beginning on that, working on how to make it get into development more quickly. There's another thing completely unrelated that I thought of that's really important. Frida, you were talking about other diseases and how to get them out to lower income countries. With HIV, where the burden of the disease is largely in lower income countries, we proactively license for those markets to Indian chemical manufacturers and transfer the technology so that they could get an FDA approved product in 4 months instead of 2 years. And as a result of that, we could get products around the world almost simultaneous with US and Europe. And it was enormously successful. Gilead's market of their HIV products is 90% low income with generic molecules made by companies in India that really know how to do this large scale work and are highly motivated to do it.
Thanks, John. So we only have a few minutes left. I want to go to each of you and just ask whether you have any closing comments. Trevor, why don't we start with you?
Well, Pete, when we were chatting earlier, I said to you, the vaccines have set the challenge to the drugs and therapeutics, which is that we need to be able to have a platform where from the outset, we can have something into clinical trials in 3 months. And you said to me, well, that's impossible. So, I agree with that if that were the case, but we need now really to think about the infrastructure between pandemics. What are we going to set up after this of platforms and prepare ourselves on the drug therapeutic front so that we will be able to meet that 3-month challenge. And I think that is a doable thing, and that's a challenge to the community.
Great. Frida?
Can I put an exclamation point behind Trevor's point? Which is we were caught flat-footed in almost every dimension. I'm proud that collectively we've risen to the occasion, but preparedness is going to be the key. And I guess Dwight Eisenhower said, plans are useless, but planning is essential. And so I think planning for the next one and pulling our coalitions together and readying ourselves is really going to be the key. Thanks.
John, we'll finish up with you.
Well, I'm optimistic. I've heard other people say they're optimistic. Christian Anderson said that today. I believe because of the seriousness of this threat, the economic loss, the lives lost, that there will be resources available to do what Trevor's talking about. And we just need to really work hard to make sure we have more drugs in reserve. The only one we had this time is remdesivir. That's why it was available so quickly. And I should add that one of the most key study that was done to get that approval was done by NIH through their systems, where that really lets you know the NIH knows what they're doing here. And we just need more of these molecules developed, stockpiled, and available for the future, because we don't know what the pandemic X will be.
Well, great. Thanks a lot. Thanks to all of you for your terrific comments and for participating. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.